Arguably the greatest female star ever to come out of the studio system. For over half a century, Elizabeth Taylor's extraordinary beauty and talent saw her make over 50 films, win 5 Academy nominations, and bag 2 Oscars.
I don't think there'll ever be another movie star like Elizabeth Taylor.
She was a star of enormous worldwide magnitude.
I can't think of one single actress today that comes even close.
You've got at me. You don't have to do anything, George. 1,000 years of you has been quite enough.
She was one of these formidable, beautiful creatures that just had a laser-like intensity when you watched her act.
Truth, truth. Everybody keeps hollering about the truth.
She was so bright and so smart and so intuitive in her acting and in her friendships.
Famous for more than just her films, in her turbulent private life, she was a divorcee at 18, a widow at 26, and one half of the greatest love affair of the 20th century.
She was a collector of men and a collector of jewels and a very good friend.
She lived life to the fullest, wore her sensuality and sexuality with grace and style.
I've got a nice smell about you.
There will never be a woman in film, in the American scene, like Elizabeth Taylor.
The last survivor of Hollywood's golden age. Tonight, we pay tribute to the world's most iconic film star, Dame Elizabeth Taylor. Famed as one of the most beautiful women in the world, for over half a century, Elizabeth Taylor's dramatic dark looks and vibrant violet eyes captivated audiences and made an indelible impression on all who met her.
First time you met her, you couldn't take your eyes off her. It was amazing. Nature did her well.
I do remember thinking, you are the most extraordinary woman I've ever been this close to.
She did turn to me and she turned the eyes full onto me, and it was an extraordinary experience. It was like a sort of mist swam in front of my eyes. It was just total knockout beauty.
All of us at school just thought she was so gorgeous, and we all wanted to look like her. She was astonishingly good looking.
I don't think Elizabeth ever really thought how beautiful she was. She wasn't a person who was always looking in the mirror and, you know, saying, oh, am I beautiful? You know, everybody else was saying that.
It was this extraordinary beauty which first caught the attention of MGM Studios. They signed her up and gave her a role in Lassie Come Home at the age of 8.
Poor Lassie. Poor Lassie. Poor girl.
When Elizabeth did Lassie Come Home, I think the studio really saw her potential in that.
Encouraged by her ambitious mother, by the age of 12, Elizabeth secured her first major role in the film National Velvet.
She certainly had some of the key attributes for the part. Had to have an English accent, it's the Grand National. She had to know about horses, she knew about horses, but she didn't really have a box office following yet.
It said that people went to see the latest Mickey Rooney film but left talking about Elizabeth Taylor.
Isn't he beautiful? He's new. I've never seen him before.
Yeah, he's got lots of vinegar, I'll grant you.
It's almost hard to believe looking back, but Mickey Rooney was the far greater star. It was his picture. But the moment that Elizabeth Taylor appears on screen, the picture is hers. She mesmerizes the camera.
He's loose.
He made it. Did you see him take that fence?
Come back, you'll get trampled on.
Whoa! 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 There, what a lovely boy he is.
I think Elizabeth loved making National Velvet because she always had a passion for horses. And she was a wonderful rider from the time she was a very little girl, you know, when she came over from England. So she would have been heartbroken if she hadn't played the part.
Although the role seemed made for her, initially the studios weren't convinced. But the young and determined Elizabeth Taylor wasn't about to take no for an answer.
I desperately wanted the part because it was me. It was my whole life, my relationship and love for horses. And the producer saw me and he said, well, I'm very sorry, Elizabeth. You're very sweet and you're very talented and very nice, but you're just too small. You know, no one would believe it. And I guess it was the natural time in my life for growing. But, I mean, I was swinging from doors to make myself grow. I did 40 jumps every morning. I ate steak for breakfast, lunch, dinner. I exercised. I literally stretched myself, and I grew 3 inches in 3 months. And Pandro Berman, the producer, had the marks on his door. And he said, with that kind of tenacity, honey, you got the part.
She went and did a lot of having her spine pulled to get the role in National Velvet. And I think that upset her spine. You know, you don't do that to a 12-year-old or 13. And I think that that's what started her pain problems.
Elizabeth was fearless, and in the film often did much of the riding herself. But she was also accident-prone, and the combination proved disastrous.
During the filming of National Velvet, Elizabeth had the first of many accidents on set to do with filming, where she fell from her horse and broke her back. It marked the beginning of a whole series of filming-related and off-screen accidents and illnesses.
When her friend Margaret O'Brien starred with her in the film Little Women, she witnessed another such accident.
I remember one time she broke her leg. In fact, I think I have a picture of Elizabeth and her cast, and then she had everybody sign her cast.
She was terribly accident-prone. I mean, if there was a splinter flying around on the set, it would end up in Elizabeth's eye.
Richard Brooks, the director, said if you put a chair in the middle of the room and nothing else in the room, Elizabeth Taylor will find a way to trip over that chair. So she was accident-prone and, you know, suffered terribly on some of these things, but always seemed to bounce back.
By the age of 18, she'd already made 10 films. Rigidly controlled by the studio system, the next step in her life also ran like an MGM production.
Hollywood's wedding of the year at the Beverly Hills Catholic Church, as lovely British-born screen star Elizabeth Taylor arrives with her father for her marriage to Conrad Hilton Jr., crowning a romance everybody's been interested in.
It was decided partly by the studio, partly by her own family, that it'd be a very good idea if she settled down and got married. And Nicky Hilton was the husband of choice.
It's very clear that that marriage to Nicky Hilton was one that the studio wanted and manipulated into happening. Elizabeth went along very happily because Nicky Hilton seemed like a great guy.
As the impressive wedding cake is cut, film fans everywhere join the reception guests in wishing the newlywed good luck, long life, and happiness.
The whole wedding at the church was completely stage managed by MGM, down to the bridesmaids were all MGM stock players, and the MGM set design people had decorated the church, so it was really quite the MGM production.
The world's happiest honeymooners, glamorous film star Elizabeth Taylor and her husband Nick Hilton arrive at Northolt. They've been to Paris and now hope to visit Ascot.
We've been in Paris for about a week. It was just wonderful. We had such a gay time.
But the fairy tale didn't last. Within 30 weeks of the wedding, Elizabeth shocked her fans by announcing their separation.
The marriage was a total failure. It didn't last much beyond the honeymoon stage, apparently, because Nicky Hilton was very rich, the heir to the hotel chain, was a heavy drinker and beat her up. And that was it. She decided she wasn't going to have that anymore.
He looked very nice when you talked to him, so I'm sure that she didn't see any of this in him at the time. But it happened, and I think she was very smart to get out of the marriage as fast as she did. And I know, of course, the studio and her parents then did not want her to stay with him, and she didn't.
And I think it was from that moment on that Elizabeth Taylor said, I am going to take control of my life. Not my mother, not the studio, not any husband.
Demonstrating her unique ability to bounce back, Elizabeth threw herself into her next film, and the most challenging role to date.
I think the ultimate Elizabeth Taylor movie is The Place in the Sun, the George Stevens movie, in which she was so beautiful. She was 18, I think, or 19. She was playing opposite Montgomery Clift.
I'd go anywhere with you.
You really mean that? You'd marry me?
Haven't I told you? I intend to.
In A Place in the Sun, she seems to have a kind of recklessness about her that's very appealing. She demonstrates a complete lack of concern for her own physical safety when she executes one of the most impressive feints in cinema history. The second really significant part about that film is that it introduced her to Montgomery Clift.
Wow.
Who she claims taught her everything there is to know about acting.
Montgomery Clift was her best friend, ever, I think, male or female. She had a great deal of motherly protection of Montgomery Clift, who she regarded as a brilliant actor and kind of weak. And she liked to hug him and feel sorry for him, and he drank a lot, and she felt very badly for him. Elizabeth went all the way on things. She loved.
She was one of these formidable, beautiful creatures that just had a laser-like intensity when you watched her act. She just kind of nailed you with those eyes.
She had these amazing close-ups when she grabs Montgomery Clift and she says, tell Mama all.
Tell Mama. Tell Mama all.
And they are just so beautiful. It's quite mesmerizing.
It was the first time I'd ever said, I love you, except to a dog or a horse. And it was the first time I'd really been kissed on the screen. And I think it is one of the more romantic roles that I've ever been given.
The film opened to critical acclaim and propelled Elizabeth Taylor's career from cute child star to beautiful leading lady. Off-camera romance was also in the air. Less than a year after her divorce from Nicky Hilton, her second engagement to actor Michael Wilding was announced.
All cameras at London Airport are focused on two people very much in love. Britain's Michael Wilding and his lovely young bride-to-be, Elizabeth Taylor.
Michael Wilding needed somebody who would boost his career and take his name up a few notches in Hollywood. And Elizabeth Taylor was exactly the right person to do that. He provided her with a stable home life, with a solid husband and a couple of kids. And of course, what Elizabeth provided to Michael Wilding was a step up the ladder in Hollywood.
Elizabeth's marriage to Michael Wilding was sort of on the rebound from the bad marriage. And he was a very nice, sweet, gentle person who would have been the opposite of Nicky Hilton. And I think that's why she married him.
Despite difficulties, the marriage lasted 4 years, and they had 2 children, Michael and Christopher.
I think it was a very sweet, positive marriage, but it didn't give her that great love that she was looking for.
In 1956, Elizabeth's next major film would become another classic. Co-starring Hollywood heartthrobs James Dean and Rock Hudson, Giant cast her as the feisty female lead once more.
She plays the young sort of temptress who seduces and wins the Rock Hudson character extremely well, with this kind of impish, cheeky sexuality.
Part of the tension in Giant is that she's from the East Coast, and this is rough frontier America, entirely dominated by men. But she takes on the men.
You don't feel well, Leslie.
I feel just great. My adrenaline glands are pumping beautifully. Boo!
There really was an enormous symmetry between this character in Giant and the real-life Elizabeth.
You knew what a frightful girl I was when you married me. I did not deceive you, sir. From the very first moment, I couldn't have been more unpleasant. Anyway, you're stuck with me.
On Giant, both Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson were facing similar challenges. They were both known primarily for being beautiful, for being kind of glamorous movie stars rather than being actors. I think they came on the film under similar circumstances, and of course Elizabeth adored gay men, trusted gay men, so right away I think she felt, oh, here's somebody I can be friends with.
Jordan, you would think somebody had spoiled you terribly. Your wife or somebody.
I haven't any wife. I live with my sister.
Why aren't you married, Jordan?
She had this wonderful relationship with gay men where she didn't have to worry about the sexual tension, she didn't have to worry about them hitting on her, and she could trust them in a way that she felt she could do with no one else.
I think among her many cardinal virtues was loyalty. I mean, when she'd talk about her friends, whether it was James Dean, Rock Hudson, once Elizabeth felt that connection with someone, it stayed. It was unshakable.
But it was her friendship with the troubled young James Dean which would have the most profound effect on Elizabeth.
They were set to shoot one of the last scenes of the picture. James Dean had already finished all of his shots in the picture, and so they were called to the set, Elizabeth and Rock, and they got the news that James Dean had been killed in a car accident. Elizabeth was unable to proceed that day and went home sick and was not able to come back to the studio for several days to finish making the picture.
Dean's death devastated Elizabeth. 2 days after it was announced, she was admitted to hospital suffering depression. It was some weeks before she was well enough to return to finish the film.
She held up production, much to the irritation of George Stevens. But her later scenes drew upon some of that depth of feeling, drew upon her loss, and I think gave them power.
Her next film, Raintree County, gave her her first Oscar nomination, and with it came the critical acclaim that had previously eluded her. But it was her private life that would once again take center stage. A day after the separation from her second husband was announced, another suitor came knocking at the MGM door.
I think Elizabeth was in love with love. I really do. And I think she was an incredible romantic. And she was working in this MGM since she was a child. And I think she was always in search of the perfect man. I think she found her perfect man in Mike Todd.
The difference that from the Wilding marriage was that they actually were also head over heels in love with each other. So it worked on many levels.
Elizabeth Taylor married the fabulous Mike Todd early in 1957. And their marriage carried with it the electricity of two exciting personalities. Hollywood, the world, was their stage.
Mike Todd was a swashbuckling entrepreneur type who had thrown all his resources into making of this gigantic blockbuster movie around the world in 80 days. He just sort of overwhelmed her. He was more flamboyant than she was.
It was Mike Todd who started Elizabeth's lifelong love of jewels. In the coming months, he would shower her with millions of dollars worth.
What sort of fellow is Mike to live with?
Well, I think he's the nicest person I've ever lived with. No, he's a wonderful man. He has everything that you could possibly want, and he's very generous.
There was a great story where Elizabeth's swimming in the pool, and Mike comes over and he says, you know, I have something for you. And Elizabeth, pregnant, swimming in this grand pool, opens this box, and lo and behold, there are these Cartier Burmese rubies and diamond suite. And Todd hands her another box, and there's the necklace, and there's a ring, and there's a tiara, and it just goes on and on. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more beautiful, radiant, pregnant woman. And that's the dream factor about Elizabeth. You know, that is Elizabeth to a T. She's swimming, she's pregnant, but she's wearing the best jewelry in the world.
By 1958, Elizabeth Taylor had 3 children and was happily settled in her 3rd marriage, when she starred alongside Paul Newman to make one of the best films of her career.
MGM originally wanted to make Cat on a Hot Tin Roof as a black and white picture. And Richard Brooks said, you can't do this. I've got the most beautiful eyes on the planet, Elizabeth Taylor and Paul Newman. You can't do this to me. We need color for this picture. And MGM still said no. And it took Mike Todd going to the MGM brass and saying, this picture will be made in color, for the studio to change its mind.
Living with somebody you love can be lonelier than living entirely alone. And the one you love doesn't love you.
Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, a Tennessee Williams play, centers around the character Maggie and her troubled marriage to a man who refuses to sleep with her.
You can't even stand drinking out of the same glass, can you?
It was a performance that demanded a lot more depth from her than possibly anything she'd done before. And she was equal to it.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Like what, Maggie?
Like you were just looking?
Look at her leading men at that time. You needed big people to cope with Elizabeth Taylor as an actress. And if you don't have a real actor, she eats them alive. And Paul Newman, you know, is the tops, and he can cope with Elizabeth Taylor. But I think it says something very flattering about her acting career that they had to put Hollywood's greatest leading men opposite her.
You know what I feel like? I feel all the time like a cat on a hot tin roof.
Then jump off the roof, Maggie, jump off it. Our cats jump off roofs and they land uninjured. Do it, jump.
Jump where? Into what?
Take a lover.
I don't deserve that.
It's a very sexy, very feminine, very passionate performance.
Lean on me, baby.
Those eyes, those lips, those shoulders, those breasts, that figure. I mean, that torso.
There is a famous poster of her in a low-cut negligee sitting on a bed. That was quite a risky and a risque still to promote the film with in those days. And that began to build the image of the femme fatale which she was becoming in private life as well as public life.
But the filming of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof was interrupted by a cruel twist of fate. In March 1958, Elizabeth Taylor and Mike Todd had been married 13 months when he set off on a trip from which he would never return.
In the private plane named for his wife, the drama of the showman reaches finis. He was rarely without her, as in these last films of him alive. Mike Todd left Elizabeth Taylor in Hollywood and flew to his death in an isolated mountain valley 22 miles southwest of Grants, New Mexico. A writer, Art Cohen, a pilot and co-pilot lost their lives with Mr. Todd. Unofficial theory blames the crash on icing, which it is said the pilot reported a few minutes before the crash.
I felt terrible for Elizabeth because I felt that was probably the right man she finally met for her, and that this was a good marriage, and, you know, what a tragedy this was, to finally meet the right person, and then he was taken from her.
Later on, Elizabeth would say that if Mike hadn't died, they would have been married for the rest of their lives.
She told me that she never stopped thinking about Mike Todd every day of her life till the end of her life.
When Mike Todd died, filming for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof was postponed. But only 2 weeks later, the broken-hearted actress was forced back to work.
It was hard to do the film because of the emotional pain I was under. It was doubly hard for me. Some of the lines hit home so badly.
I know what it's like to lose somebody you love.
Careful, Maggie, your claws are showing.
I thought she was fabulous in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. She made that when she was really upset. And I think the drama in her life was able to be transcended onto the screen.
Even under such emotional strain, Elizabeth managed to turn in a performance that would win her a second Oscar nomination. It would also send her into the arms of her late husband's best friend, singer Eddie Fisher.
Eddie was called Todd's best friend. Whether he was his best friend or not, he was certainly very much entrenched in the Todd organization. So it's very natural that he would have been around to look in on Elizabeth and take care of her.
Eddie Fisher befriended her during the whole episode following Todd's death. Fisher was a very good friend to her.
Eddie Fisher, of course, admitted later on that he had had the hots for Elizabeth for some time. And, from taking care of her to consoling her quickly led to romantic feelings on his part and eventually on her part as well.
Not only was Eddie Fisher Mike Todd's best friend, he was also married to Hollywood sweetheart Debbie Reynolds. News of the affair with Elizabeth became the scandal of the decade.
Debbie Reynolds, everybody adored because she was in Singing in the Rain and she seemed so innocent, lovely. They were an ideal couple. And this woman goes and breaks up this ideal Hollywood marriage.
Well, I know Elizabeth was looked at as the painted lady that, stole Eddie Fisher from Debbie Reynolds, but I don't think Elizabeth was really thinking at that time because she was still getting over Mike Todd.
Oscar night in Hollywood, when the motion picture world names its top performers of the year and the greatest picture.
In 1959, Elizabeth was the firm favourite to win the Best Actress Oscar for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But once again, she was overlooked by the Academy.
Susan Hayward, I want to live.
There were certainly people who felt that she should have got the Oscar, but that her Oscar hopes were blighted by her off-screen scandal, which was a huge scandal.
By the age of 28, Elizabeth Taylor had divorced 2 husbands and tragically lost a third. With her private life playing out like one of her celluloid sagas, she went from Hollywood royalty to scandalous homewrecker. But again, Elizabeth's fighting spirit saw her through, and the next film would elevate her to superstardom once more.
Cleopatra marked a huge stage in Liz Taylor's career, personally and professionally.
Cleopatra was the biggest movie that Fox were going to make. That's 20th Century Fox. And they decided that I was going to play Cleopatra. And they were going to go ahead and make the movie with me.
Don't you love me? Don't you want Egypt? Don't you want the world?
So I did all these tests, and I thought I was going to get the part. And then the budget climbed and climbed and climbed. I have no idea why it climbed. I think they decided to make sets in England at Pinewood or something, and they cost a lot. So they told me, well, they didn't tell me. My agent told me, yeah, they're not going to use you. They're going to use Elizabeth.
Fox wanted Elizabeth Taylor to play Cleopatra. So they said, sure, that's great. She'll play the part. She wants $1 million for it.
It was unheard of. I think the most that actors ever got in those days was like 150,000, 250,000, maybe if you were Marlon Brando or Gregory Peck.
The $1 million deal made history. The studios even set up a press conference when the contract was signed. Elizabeth Taylor had become the highest paid star in the world.
She went on to film Cleopatra in London, which was madness in itself, because films set in Egypt and Rome, and they're filming in London. Where the hell are they going to get the weather from to start with? And the weather actually played an important part in what happened next, because she was flimsily dressed as Cleopatra in rather cold conditions at Pinewood Studios, and she contracted pneumonia. Very, very bad pneumonia. She had a tracheostomy, and indeed she nearly died.
Over a 3-week period, Elizabeth Taylor fought for her life while the eyes of the world looked on. Amongst the many news reports, one even prematurely announced her death.
My agent, Jay Cantor, called, and he said, Elizabeth has been taken very ill. She's been rushed to the hospital. She's not expected to live. So I want you to stay by the phone all day, because if she dies, you're going to have to take the night plane to London, and they're going to put you in her costumes and they're going to start shooting with you. I said, that's terrible. How awful. I don't want her to die. I mean, and I would just feel so dreadful. He said, look, honey, that's showbiz.
Of course, crowds collected outside the London clinic when it was known that Liz Taylor would soon be leaving. They waited hours to see her and to film the scene. And what an amazing scene it was when she was brought out in a wheelchair. Everyone knows the story of her very grave illness, and now there were so many well-wishers crowding round, it was an impossible job getting her to the roles.
Soon after her recovery, the next Oscars were announced. Again, Elizabeth was in the running for Best Actress for a film she'd made the previous year, Butterfield 8.
There was a groundswell of public sympathy for her for having survived, which she thinks, and a lot of other people think, accounted for the fact that she absolutely walked away with the Oscar for Butterfield 8.
Things move to a climax as all eyes are on Yul Brynner and the Best Actress of the Year award.
Elizabeth Taylor.
Convalescing from her recent grave illness, Elizabeth Taylor receives a prolonged accolade from the audience. It's a popular choice, an Oscar for the beauty who is a winner after 4 successive tries.
In Butterfield 8, she plays an alcoholic prostitute, a role that Elizabeth was initially reluctant to take.
I think Elizabeth's performance in Butterfield 8 is one of the most honest portrayals of a woman's sexuality that had been on screen up until that time. She plays a young woman who enjoys having fun, who enjoys having sex, who has her life in her own hands. And I think audiences would have been quite surprised by such honesty from a picture, and because it's also what they perhaps suspected was about Elizabeth in real life as well.
Can I help you with anything? Elsewhere?
And after she got the Oscar for Butterfield 8, she went back to filming Cleopatra, which now, very sensibly, they moved to Rome. And the cast had changed. Originally, Peter Finch was supposed to play Mark Antony, but he'd had to drop out because of other commitments, and so Richard Burton came in.
You will kneel.
I will what?
On your knees.
Dare ask the proconsul of the Roman Empire?
I asked it of Julius Caesar. I demand it of you.
With Richard Burton came the big, what Burton always referred to as le scandale, the big love affair. He was married to Sybil, she was married to Eddie Fisher, but I think once they got together on the stage of Cleopatra, pow.
When they met, she said she saw him for the first time. He had a terrible hangover and his hand was shaking, and she found this endearing. But then when they did their first kiss, the director had to say, "Okay, it's time for lunch. Can you stop that now?" They wouldn't stop the kiss.
It was obvious to everyone on the set that these two people were falling in love, that the chemistry between them was so thick, and they would disappear. They'd turn, where are they? They're not here to shoot this scene while they're off in the dressing room together.
I was very young when they were together, but I do remember seeing them together quite a lot. I think Burton felt that to have the most beautiful, glamorous woman in the world showering her passion on you was just completely intoxicating. He couldn't do anything about it. It hit him like a ton of bricks.
Beginning with tonight, you must never envy Caesar or anything again.
Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor were the two most extraordinary people that I ever met. I think she found in him a match, and Richard loved being the one who was adored by the one and only Elizabeth.
It didn't take long for the press to get wind of the adulterous affair. Again, Elizabeth found herself at the centre of a scandal.
Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton didn't apologize for falling in love, and that's what made them so different. And that's what made them so subversive in some ways, and it frightened a lot of people. The Vatican called them moral vagrants, and they were denounced in the halls of Congress and in Parliament. And it was this sense that they were flouting the very rules of society.
I remember the first picture that I saw was on the cover of an Italian magazine called Novella 2000, and it was Elizabeth and Richard lying on a yacht together. Apparently, they could not go anywhere without the paps there.
2 years after finishing Cleopatra, the pair finalized their divorces and married in March 1964.
Everybody was fascinated by them, and on their own they had been, but together there was just something. They were just this wonderful double act of a sort of moody and poetic, sort of literary Shakespearean actor and this tempestuous Hollywood goddess.
They became the template for the modern celebrity now. Their lives were no longer protected, and they had to have an entourage to protect them, and everything they did became public knowledge.
With Richard, Elizabeth was able to lead the life of a Hollywood superstar once more.
Elizabeth and Richard thought nothing about spending money. You know, they were just living this outrageous lifestyle that everybody could see. Diamond rings, fur coats. You know, Elizabeth loved living large. There's no denying that.
Like we'd be flying from one country to another country in midair, and all of a sudden we'd decide to fly to Venice for lunch. Things like that.
Original hijackers, then, really.
During their 10-year marriage, the Burtons spent approximately $65 million on their champagne lifestyle. Richard showered Elizabeth with jewelry, and his first big purchase was the famously flawless Krupp diamond.
Elizabeth Taylor, here with Noel Coward, is the bride's godsister. She was wearing that ring.
Richard rang me up and said, Elizabeth's not very well, and you ought to go and see her. She would love it if you went and saw her. So I did. And I went into her room, and she wasn't looking very well. She was completely covered with bedclothes, and then a shy little hand came out and said, "Look, I never take it off." And there on her hand was this mighty rock diamond, which Richard had given her. I think it cost him £1 million or $1 million, which in those days was simply frantic.
The pressures of a celebrity lifestyle pushed the Burtons into a period of heavy drinking and partying.
Elizabeth and Richard were both passionate people, and they loved to go out and have a drink and party, and Elizabeth wasn't that much of a drinker that I remember, but I think if you put the two together, they would drink more and party more together than if they were separated.
Elizabeth could be common as muck, yes, absolutely. Enormous vulgarity she commanded when she wanted to.
I enjoyed her company, and she was vivacious, and she was bubbly, and she told a good joke, and she swore a lot.
She used to say that Burton was, he was worth having a row with, because he gave us good, obviously, and he resorted to very colourful but also rather poetic language.
Burton and Taylor made 11 films together, but it was the 1966 film, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, that best captured their powerful on-screen chemistry.
The way that they played Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which undoubtedly was her finest moment, maybe his, on the screen. It's about this warring couple, an academic and his wife, and they're drunk and they're always tearing each other apart.
In fact, he was sort of a flop. A great, big, fat flop.
Stop it, Mother.
I hope that was an empty bottle, George. You can't afford to waste good liquor. Not on your salary, not on an associate professor's salary.
To play the middle-aged Martha, Elizabeth used prosthetic makeup and gained nearly 2 stone in weight.
No one expected that Elizabeth Taylor would even get that part. Mike Nichols, the director, originally wanted Bette Davis for the part. He wanted an old, middle-aged, shrewish woman. And Elizabeth Taylor was still young and beautiful at this point. She was 32 when she got the part.
It was quite unheard of in those days for an actress as good-looking as she was to put on all that weight and play that blousy person who was supposed to be 20 years older than her. And I thought she was brilliant. She was terrific in that movie.
Stand it.
I cannot stand it.
You can stand it. You married me for it.
There was only one funny moment in that scene, and it wasn't too funny at the time, where Richard takes me and throws me up against the car. You can hear in the soundtrack a kind of thumping sound. That was my head against the back of the car.
Stop you! Stop it! Stop it!
And I kept on going, and that was the take that Mike Nichols chose to use in the film.
Oh, boy. You really are having a field day, aren't you?
In a way, it's almost like an awful rehearsal for the relationship they had later when they were both drinking too much and they couldn't live together anymore.
After nearly 10 years of marriage, the superstar couple filed for divorce in 1974.
Liz Taylor was leaving town following her breakup with Richard Burton, and this is the mob scene that greeted her.
There is no question about it that they were still in love with each other. So it must have been a big wrench for them to have parted. And I think it was just the nature of their personalities that they couldn't live together.
But just 16 months later, Burton and Taylor were back together. They remarried, this time in Botswana.
They've been invited to a kind of second honeymoon, a tour of this splendid game reserve, and they're seeing it in the best way of all, on a helicopter safari.
By the second marriage, it really became where he had a drinking problem. Elizabeth really wasn't into the drinking very much, because Elizabeth was also a mother and had children, and she was a very good mother, and I just don't think she wanted to live with that. So they did part, but I think they always kept in touch and they always loved each other.
The reconciliation only lasted 8 months. The love affair of the century ended in divorce for the second time.
By the mid-1970s, Elizabeth wasn't really sure where she belonged anymore. She certainly wasn't making movies in the same way that she had been. Burton was gone, and there was a kind of a void. It was kind of a big question mark. Where do I go from here?
Elizabeth thought she'd found the answer in Washington when she married her 6th husband, the very respectable Republican politician, John Warner.
I've been campaigning for 18 months now.
And now you're just going out to face the crowd.
She really enjoyed the campaign trail. There was getting out meeting people, and she was wildly popular. People came to see Warner, really to see Elizabeth Taylor.
Senator Warner would be in Washington most of the time, and Elizabeth would be in a house in Virginia, which she didn't grow up there. She didn't know many people there.
And she found herself sitting around their house in Georgetown, eating chili all day, and sweets and candies and cakes and drinking too much.
Elizabeth Taylor always claimed that the marriage was where her weight problems really started, all those political lunches, whining and dining members of the Senate.
She was the senator's wife, which I think she was quite bored with. That's when she put on a lot of weight. She put on about 50 pounds.
Snake-eyed son of a bitch, Marty Fenn.
A year later, Elizabeth had slimmed down for what would be her final film, an Agatha Christie thriller called The Mirror Cracked. She was reunited with her old friend Rock Hudson and, with some irony, played the part of an aging movie queen.
Neither of them with you.
Lola Brewster, actress. If she's read the script, I'd see a blister on her finger.
Getting his first break was an unknown Irish actor.
The Mirror Cracked was my debut in movies. It just happened to be with Liz Taylor. I think I was 25. I was fresh out of drama school. My agent called me up one day. He said, I got you 2 jobs. One's called The Mirror Cracked. You got to show up Monday morning at the studio. So for me, you know, I started my cinematic career with Liz Taylor. Doesn't get better than that, really.
How I've longed for you, to take you in my arms and clasp you to my bosom.
I had a great day. I had a wonderful time in her company and on the movie, and I have a photograph in my office at home, clasped to her bosom.
Jason, will you get that creep out of my eye line?
Cut.
Back in Washington, cracks were starting to appear in her marriage to John Warner.
He would be in Washington most of the time, and I think Elizabeth needed somebody that was companions, that was exciting, that would be her lover, that she could be with a lot, not somebody that was away most of the time.
She was the least likely Washington wife. She was not a Washington wife.
After divorcing Warner, Elizabeth courageously acknowledged her addictions.
I was a mess, and I admitted to myself that I was an alcoholic and I had a problem with prescription pills. And in order to survive, in order to live, I had to change that. And I wanted to live and be a whole, complete human being.
Elizabeth was the first Hollywood star to be treated at the now famous Betty Ford Rehab Clinic.
When she did go to the Betty Ford Clinic, just like everything else in her life, she wasn't going to pretend or hide or make up stories to cover it up. She also wasn't going to apologize for it. She'd never been one to apologize for anything. She said, hey, I've got a problem. I'm going in to take care of it.
Refreshed from rehab, Elizabeth needed a new, exciting challenge. So at the age of 55, the actress became the first star to launch a range of signature perfumes.
These have always brought me luck.
I'll bet.
White Diamonds, the intriguing fragrance from Elizabeth Taylor.
Elizabeth was extremely involved with her perfumes. Like everything else that was important to her in her life, she was extremely hands-on about it. I think she'd always wanted to design a scent. She'd talked about it for a long time because she was someone who loved perfume, always wore perfume, even for herself at home. It was part of who she was.
John Dryden wrote, "Where passion rules, how weak does reason prove?" You'll see.
Elizabeth Taylor's passion.
Her fragrance empire is incredibly successful. To date, it's $1 billion industry. It continues to be the top seller for Elizabeth Arden and is consistently one of the top sellers of all fragrances.
In the 1980s, Elizabeth's business empire flourished. But her success would be tainted by personal tragedy.
The actor Richard Burton has died in Switzerland at the age of 58. He suffered a cerebral hemorrhage at his home near Geneva and died later in hospital.
Their relationship, which had started like a great coup de foudre, a flash of lightning, continued flashing, burning, searing, illuminating, right through their relationship until Rich died.
Miss Taylor flew to Switzerland for what was supposed to be a private visit, just to have a few quiet moments by her former husband's grave in the churchyard at Celigny. But the foreign press were waiting.
No flash. No flash. Can't you just back off? Give her 5 minutes.
The appeals went unheeded, and Miss Taylor then decided to give up.
Just a year later, Elizabeth suffered another blow. It triggered one of the most significant turning points in her life.
Within the past half hour, we've heard that the film star Rock Hudson has died at his home in California. He was 59. It had been learned just over 3 months ago that Mr. Hudson had been suffering from the disease AIDS.
Elizabeth Taylor became involved with AIDS first through, of course, her friend Rock Hudson, and when he got sick and died, I think she was obviously devastated. I think there's no question that Rock Hudson's illness and death is what got Elizabeth Taylor involved. They were extremely close friends.
I think the commitment to HIV totally gave Elizabeth a completely new focus in her life. She'd gotten bored with making movies. I think she wasn't that interested in it anymore. I think she wasn't that interested in having to make her living from the way she looked. she realized that there was a useful part to fame, that she could actually use it in a way that would, you know, contribute to really cultural dynamic change. And that made her feel good about being famous, which had not been such a big deal to her before.
All we can do at this point is help our friends who have AIDS. And the only way we can do that is by doing what you're doing, by giving of support, money, and love.
She, I think, was courageous in standing up there and giving a face to this insidious, disgusting disease at a time where people were being banished and shamed by society. She had the balls to say, look at this. This is what's happening to these poor people's lives, and pay attention.
She took the risk of this disease, which nobody would talk about and nobody wanted to hear about, and stood up and said, I'm talking about it. You gonna ignore me? What are you gonna say to me? You gonna ignore me? I don't think so.
Is this something that we can bear? No. The AIDS crisis is not over.
She did this press conference, and she was asked specifically about Bush Sr.'s HIV policies, and she just sort of said, I don't even think President Bush knows how to spell AIDS, and made the front page of the newspapers back in New York and all this. And when you worked with her for a long time, you sort of forgot how famous she was, but suddenly you'd sort of be reminded of it, sort of when she said something like that, and it was reported everywhere, and it really, really changed the way people viewed how the US was treating HIV.
Let's support the programs that work, whatever the cost.
She was a very kind woman. I mean, that was the thing that's often overlooked. I mean, I suppose her charity work indicates that she was a very kind woman, but she was personally kind to people, as I had reason to know.
She was stubborn, and she was dedicated, and she really put her whole heart into saving people's lives. But she fought battles that were incredible. You know, and she changed history. She really did.
Tonight, you wonderful people have raised in excess of over $1 million.
She didn't have to do any of this. She was a millionaire, she was a movie star, she had a wonderful life in Bel Air. Yes, Rock Hudson got her going, but why did she continue? I think because she was the real deal. I mean, she really, truly cared about this.
There'd be many people that would not be alive today if it was not for Elizabeth Taylor.
Elizabeth's humanitarian work was recognized all over the world. In England, the Queen made her a Dame of the British Empire.
Dame Elizabeth Taylor, for services to acting and to charity.
And Hollywood paid tribute with an honorary Oscar in 1993.
Even though Elizabeth adored getting her first 2 Oscars, I think it was the 3rd Oscar, the one for her humanitarian work, that really meant the most to her, because that was really how she always said she wanted her legacy to be remembered.
While Elizabeth was tirelessly campaigning, her health was deteriorating. In 1988, she was back at the Betty Ford Clinic with a renewed addiction to painkillers. But during recovery, she fell in love.
The actress Elizabeth Taylor has married for the 8th time to a California builder, Larry Fortensky, who's 20 years her junior. The wedding was held at the secluded ranch of the pop star Michael Jackson. The cameras did get a glimpse, first of the guests around the purpose-built summer house, and finally the couple themselves and the bride's $30,000 gown. Miss Taylor said, "I thought I'd try it once more before I died."
Elizabeth sold her exclusive wedding pictures for $3 million in order to set up the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation.
This check arrived at her house, paid to the order of Elizabeth Taylor, $3 million. And she decided that she was going to go down to the bank herself to personally deposit that check and open the account for her foundation. So she got dressed, and she called her driver, and she got in the car, and she drove down the hill from Bel Air and went to the bank in Beverly Hills. And she told me, she said, and I walked in the bank, and I looked around, and I realized, David, I had never been in a bank before in my entire life. Can you imagine that? And it's like, well, yeah, I can imagine that. You're Elizabeth Taylor. Why on earth would you ever have to go to a bank?
In 1996, her 8th and final marriage came to an end. Her health also continued to decline. She then endured 2 hip operations and brain surgery to remove a benign tumor. But Elizabeth courageously continued to raise millions of dollars for her AIDS foundation.
Elizabeth had lots of health problems, as everybody knows, and it did impact her AIDS work. There were times when she had to cancel events because of poor health, and we would scramble to get a substitute. But there were times when she literally got out of a sick bed.
I have done this every year for 30 years, and it's tradition.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dame Elizabeth Taylor.
In 2010, Elizabeth came to Britain for a special event at Buckingham Palace.
She'd flown over with her medicals and people from Los Angeles to be there to see a new head of Richard, which was unveiled on that occasion.
Prince Charles comes in and is introduced to us, and then, of course, late, making her entrance through Queen Elizabeth's back passages, Elizabeth is wheeled into the room, and as if she is the royalty in the room. She's wheeled in front of the bust of Richard, and she looked at it and started crying. And it was terribly, terribly moving.
I think deep down in Elizabeth's heart was a very special flame for Rich, which lasted right through to the end, I think.
I think she probably had a secret yearning for Burton that went on way beyond the first 2 marriages, maybe to the end of her life.
I remember thinking she's near the end. I thought the spark was flickering at the very best. I never saw her again. And it was a sad last seeing.
In March 2011, at the age of 79, surrounded by her 4 children, Dame Elizabeth Taylor died of heart failure.
She was always a fighter, and she always got over her illnesses. And that's why I was so shocked and surprised to hear that Elizabeth did not get over it this time.
Elizabeth always knew how to make an entrance, and her funeral was no exception.
What she said in her will about a funeral says so much about her. You know, she was famous for sometimes being late on the set. She was also famous for sending herself up. So she says in her will she wants the body to arrive late for her own funeral. I just love that as the last laugh. You know, from beyond the grave, Liz Taylor is late for her own funeral. I think that's fantastically stylish, actually.
She certainly has a legacy of amazing films and a legacy of being the last superstar, the last legend, the last icon.
She was up broad, and she told you what she felt, and she was spunky, and she was the last of the great Hollywood stars.
I think courage is the word I would most associate with her. And it wasn't by any means easy.
I've heard since the phrase drop dead gorgeous, and that's what she was.
She really connected with people and she really touched people's lives.
People didn't realise what an extremely nice woman she was. She was very funny, she was witty, she was very intelligent, and she was very kind.
The the truest, loyalist, funniest friend that anybody could ever wish for.
I really loved her, but more than that, I really liked her. She was fun.